everyone, welcome back to White Sparrow Living, Luke 12:6. I'm Wendy, and today we're doing another mega video for your fall home decor. How many did we do? We've got 30 projects for your fall decorating, so sit back and relax. And now, without further ado, let's get started. I have been wanting a dough bowl forever, and the prices are just out of control, but they're so pretty. They come in all shapes and sizes, and of course different prices. And so I wanted to see if I could duplicate one using Dollar Tree items, and I am so excited to show you guys how this one turns out. So we're going to be using 8 of the Tombstone Halloween styrofoam pieces, and all I'm going to do is take out the little sticks that come in there, and I'm going to put 4 on top of each other and hot glue those all together. So after I got them all stacked up, I'm going to use some painter's tape to put them together so that I can cut them and hopefully get a straight edge that'll go together snugly. So I'm just going to be using my knife, and I cut across there, and then I'm going to remove all of the tape. So now I'm going to use a pencil to mark out the area that I want to hollow out to be the inside part of our bowl. And I did this with a utility knife and then just started making slices in it so that I could pull those out. So once I get both sides to the right depth, I'm going to take some scrap poster board and use some more of my painter's tape to make my sides taper in like the dough bowls do. And then I'll take both sides outside, and then using a big kitchen knife, I'm just going to go through my styrofoam. And it's a little tough some places because there's a lot of hot glue in there, but I just use my muscles and get all the way through that. And it's kind of like cutting bread. So I guess if you just do smaller pieces at a time, it makes it a little bit easier. So once I get both sides to look pretty much the same, I'm going to start using my painter's tape to put it all together, and then I'm going to tape the entire piece and get it completely covered in the painter's tape. So one of the things about these dough bowls is that they're hand carved out of wood, so it's got lots of imperfections and it's handmade. And imperfection is my middle name, so that's why I even tried this. So now I'm going to use some craft paper and some glue and a big bowl of water, and I'm just going to pour my glue into the water, and I'm just making a paper mache mixture. And so I'm going to cut my paper into strips and different sizes and start covering my entire dough bowl. And this is again another piece of that messy process, but it was also super fun. So make sure you put a big towel down first. So once my paper was semi-dry, I took some Mod Podge and generously covered the entire dough bowl. And then I put it under a fan to let that dry, and then turned it over and did the bottom side as well. Another one of my clips that I lost was painting my dough bowl, so that was one of the funnest parts too. So I am just totally fake painting right here, and here it is all done, and I am so in love with this, and I'm going to show it to you with some stuff inside too, which is just so pretty. But this really looks like wood, and it looks like it's hand carved, and it's got imperfections, but it is so beautiful. And so for a total cost of $9, I think this was worth the time and effort. Even if you didn't paint it and just left it with that craft paper brown color, it looks like wood. There's so many things I wish you guys could see in real life. But here it is with all of the fun goodies inside of it, and I have eucalyptus from Walmart and baby's breath from Walmart. The large pumpkin is from a DIY that I did in another video. And then I have an antler from one of my friend's husband, some pine cones, some Dollar Tree hydrangeas, some pears that I had. But oh my goodness, I just love everything in this. For our next project, we're going to be using some buffalo check ribbon, some wood leaves, and some jute twine from Dollar Tree, and then some eucalyptus leaves from Walmart, some wood beads from Amazon, and a black marker. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my eucalyptus leaves and cut these apart using my wire cutters. And for each of my napkin garnishes, I'm going to be using one stem. And these stems are 97 cents each, so it's a really good buy, but I'm just going to put about half on the top and half on the bottom. And then I used some floral tape to combine those and get those taped together, but you can skip this step and just use some jute twine to tie them together. I do that on some of them as well. So now I'm gonna add my jute twine anyway, and so I'm just gonna tie a knot in the middle, and then I'll take some buffalo check ribbon and tie that into the jute twine right in the middle. And I'll first dovetail the edges so that gives it a little bit of cuteness, and then I'm going to tie that in a sweet little bow. And on one side of the bow I'm going to use a large-eyed needle to feed on 3 of these 1-inch wooden beads, and I pulled them down just a little bit and then tied a knot at the end just so that they would kind of hang off a little bit away from the bow. And I did do a double knot on the loops of the bow so that it would stay in place. And so I just wrote 6 different words having to do with fall and Thanksgiving. So I wrote blessed, thankful, grateful, family, harvest, and gather. And this is for a place setting of 6, so that's why I had 6 different words. And these leaves come in a pack of 5, so you would have to have 2 sets if you were going to do a place setting of 6. But this was for my sweet friend Stacy, so I happened to have exactly 6 leaves left in my inventory, so it worked out perfectly. And as you can see, I used that downstroke faux calligraphy method, and I'll have a video that I did a while back that kind of goes into more detail linked in the description box below. But here's how they turned out, and I think this would be such a cute addition, especially for your Thanksgiving dinner, but just leaving it out on your dining room table on top of these buffalo check napkins, I think it just makes such a pretty presentation. And here it is set up on her dining room table. I love this farmhouse look. You might recognize that centerpiece in the middle there. That's also from another video that I did, so I'll have that linked in the description box below as well. But I love how this turned out, and Stacy, I love your dining room too. For our next project, we're going to be using this plastic leaf candy dish and 3 of the tall white candles from Dollar Tree. And all I'm going to do for this one is pull off my sticker from the back of my tray, and it's super easy because it's hard plastic. And then I'm going to paint the back of my tray first, and then once it dries I'll flip it over and paint the top. I end up giving this 2 separate coats, and I'm going to sand it after it's completely dry, and it gives such a pretty distressed look. And even though the tray starts as being this metallic copper color, it reads as a black distressing once you sand it, so it's super pretty. So this was kind of a science experiment for me, but I ended up placing all 3 of my candles in the microwave and put it on high for 8 minutes. And I wasn't sure if it was going to work or how much wax I even needed, but I got the idea from 3 other candles that I had done in a prior DIY a while back. And in the 108-degree weather, they were in the garage and the bottom half had melted. So I thought this could be a way of making a whole new candle and just pouring it in there. So they didn't all 3 melt at the same time, but it also didn't take near as much wax as I thought it might, so it only ended up taking 1 and a tiny bit of a second one. So I just poured it in to as far as I needed, but I did need all 3 wicks and place those inside of the liquid wax. And then I'm going to take some of the cinnamon smelly goodness that the Dollar Tree has and pour some in there. So I'm thinking it might even smell good when I burn it. And then I just used a couple of skewers to make my wicks stand up straight. And even though this was an easy DIY, it was very messy. And so I should have laid some paper down before I did this on my island, because it was not a very clean project. And I had a bit of a cleanup afterwards. So I'm also thinking that since these wicks are so long, I probably could have either used a tea light wick or a votive candle wick, and then I wouldn't have had to waste an actual candle on this. So now I'm going to take some jute twine and then just wrap around a couple of times to make a sweet little bow, and then I'm going to wrap that at the stem of the leaf. And then I'll take a tiny piece of boxwood that I get from Walmart for $2.48, and just tuck it right into that jute twine. And of course, make sure you keep the greenery and the twine away from the flames so that nothing catches fire, because that would be no good. And here it is, all finished, and I love how this turned out. It is so pretty, and I'm trying to get a close-up so you can see the distressing. And around the edges of the wax is that cinnamon fragrance kind of peeking out and outlining the pretty white of the candle. And of course, use discretion when you're burning this. I don't know how this will react once it burns down and gets closer to the plastic. I would assume that it's gonna be okay, but just don't take any chances or leave it unattended, of course. So I love how this turned out, and I hope you like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using 2 of these Happy Harvest truck plaques from the Dollar Tree, and also a box of any sort that'll fit in between the trucks, and then the welcome part of this Dollar Tree windmill. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off all of the little embellishments, and I really like these metal leaves, so we'll be using those in another project at some point. And then I'm going to take my utility knife and cut across the board just so that I have the back tailgate part of the truck. So I'm taking off the top part as well as the pumpkins. And all you have to do is give it a little bit of force, and after 10 swipes, I got mine separated. So now I'm going to paint the back of our plaques in the Waverly White chalk paint, and also our coin box. You really only need to paint the sides, and I painted on the inside and underneath just in case any of that shows through. If you are decorating in the red colors and dark colors, this truck is so cutie patootie painted the way it is, you probably just want to leave it like that, and then you don't have to try your hand at painting. If you do decide to leave it as the traditional little red truck, you do want to be careful when you pull off the metal leaves, because you want to try and not tear off too much of that paper. So now I'm going to start painting in the back side of my truck, and I'm using blacks and whites and grays, which is just really black, and it's going to mix in with the white to give me that soft gray color. So I'm just playing with it and blending the colors, and you guys know I'm not the greatest of painters, but that doesn't matter because this can be kind of messy, and I wanted the fenders to kind of be bumped out or look like they were curved. It didn't exactly work out well, but I just kept going at it until I got the look I want. There's probably about an inch or so of paint on top of this guy, and it's handmade, so it doesn't have to be perfect. So then I painted in my tires in just straight ink chalk paint. And then I'll also make the back windshield with my straight ink chalk paint as well. After doing this project, it would be way easier if you waited and painted the whole piece in your blended colors, your base color, and then go back and do the tailgate and the window. So now I'm going to take a little yo-yo from the kids section at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to split that apart with a flathead screwdriver, and then using my wire cutters, I'm going to cut off the piece that is kind of sticking out that attaches them together so that this will lay flat on the back of my truck. I'm going to use those as the tail lights of my truck. So now I'm going to take a black Sharpie, and on the license plate I'm going to write Blessed One. Now, if you don't have a windmill sign, you could just write in welcome with that same Sharpie pen or a black paint pen, but I decided to use this as the back, and I thought it looked like a real tailgate because it's metal and it's got that shape. So I just hot glued that right on top of that area, and then I'm going to take my tail lights and hot glue those to the bottom of my truck. So I found this silver metallic marker at the Dollar Tree in the Crafter's Square, and it works really, really well. And so I'm just going to add some highlights to my tail lights. And then once I have everything painted, I'm going to take my box and hot glue that to the bottom portion of the large piece, and then attach the front piece, again using hot glue. But you want to set it up to make sure that it's completely flat and it's going to sit up straight and not be wobbly. Then I'm going to take some leftover paint that's already on my brush. Then I'm just going to make 3 little lines to give my tires some treads. And then I'll take that same paintbrush and use it to make some shinies in my back window, which I'll end up changing to the other side, but you'll see that in a second. So now to fill the truck bed, I'm going to use some fall leaves and some floral styrofoam, and I'm just going to hot glue that down to the bottom of my box and then just start cutting off my floral stems so that I have individual picks that I can pop into that styrofoam. So I had made these Dollar Tree sock pumpkins in a prior DIY, and I thought the colors were perfect for this, so I'm just going to tuck those in the bed of the trunk. So now I'm going to make a bow, and I'm just using the fold over method where I just fold it over, and I'm going to do 2 loops on each side, and then I'm going to find the center and then make tiny little slits in the middle there so that I can put my chenille stem or pipe cleaner into that, and it'll go into those little grooves, and then you'll be able to move them around a little bit easier. But before I completely close it up and tie it off in the back, I'm going to take some raffia and fold that over a few times and get a messy little bundle and attach that using the extra pipe cleaner on there, and then I will dovetail the ends and hot glue that to the top left part of my truck. And here's how it turned out. I added a little bit of glitter, which is not always my favorite, but I think here it's super perfect with the little glitter pumpkin right there in the middle. And I think he's adorable, and I hope you like him too. For our next project, we're going to be using 4 of these 6x8 canvases, one of the short fat tin pots from the Dollar Tree, and then one of the words from this metal set, and we're going to use Harvest, and then some green floral foam, some different flowers colored for fall. And then I used this old DIY that I did last year when I first started my channel, and I'm going to use the top pumpkin because I didn't have the right size pumpkin for this project. So recycling is always a good thing. So I'm going to take off the first few rows of rope off of this planter. You can take this outside and spray paint it, but at this time it is 108 degrees outside, so I decided to go ahead and paint it with my chalk paint in my 73-degree craft room. So I'm just going to give this a couple of coats, and then I'm going to replace the rope back at the top using my hot glue. So now while that's drying, I'm going to take my canvases and remove the actual canvas material off of the wooden frames. And so I'm just using some needle nose pliers, and then I'm going to use the frames on 2 of them completely the way they are, but on the other 2 I'm going to cut those so that they will be the full 6 inches across, and I just want those 4 bars. And then I'm going to take my hot glue and put those in place, and I want to make sure that the staple holes are facing down because my box is ultimately going to be standing up vertically. So now I'm going to take some small nails, and I'm going to put those in all 4 corners on both sides, so you'll need a total of 8 nails. And I keep checking just to make sure that my nail isn't going to go through the side of my wooden pieces. And so I tap gently and kind of move it just to make sure that it goes straight down and not out the side. And so once I get the first 4 in, I'm going to turn it over and put the other full frame on the other side so that I have a perfect little box. So now I'm going to stain this using my Waverly wax in Antique, and I'm running really low, but I just scoop some out with a craft stick, and then I'm going to add some water, and that's what that little orange spray bottle is. It's just full of water, and it's actually an empty bottle of eyeglass cleaner. So I'm using that, and I just spray some into a paper plate and then brush it on, and then I'm going to wipe it off until I get it to the darkness or shade that I want it to be. And I'm going to do that on the entire frame. So now I'm going to take my metal word that says Harvest, and I'm going to use my Waverly chalk paint in ink, which is really black, and just paint that with 2 coats and let it dry in between those coats until it's nice and solid. So now I'm going to take my floral foam, and there's actually 4 different pieces in there. So I'm going to take off the top one so that it fits into my bucket, and then I'll hot glue the bottom of it. I never even take off the plastic covering because there's no point, and it keeps it all together. So I'm going to take my yellowy hydrangeas, and I'm going to tuck those into the floral foam all the way around because my pumpkin's going to sit on top of it, so that'll be sticking out between the bucket and my pumpkin. And then I'm going to take my fall leaves and tuck those in And so just to add some more buffalo check, I'm going to take that and dovetail the ends and then take a little piece of wire and cinch it in the middle and then wrap it around onto my pumpkin top. And then I'm going to actually go ahead and add another cotton boll to the top of that. And here it is all finished. And as you can see, the tin pot fits perfectly into our little planter, and the lip of it just keeps it right in place. So I love these colors, of course, and I love the deep wood with the white. And then the harvest I thought could either be left as the galvanized metal, but I liked it black to match my black pumpkin. So I love how this turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. For our next project, I'm going to be using this craft paper that I got at the Dollar Tree, and it's 30 inches wide, and I actually had just ordered some on Amazon, and it was more expensive, but you can get it there if you can't find it at Waltree. It's also some of those pitberry garlands. And so I'm going to be using my Silhouette Cameo 3, and so I use my Frisco Craft adhesive vinyl, and I'm using my 12 by 24 inch cutting mat. And this really comes in handy anytime you're cutting something that's longer than the 12 inches. So I'm going to be cutting out my scripture, and it's going to say, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever." And that's 1 Chronicles 16:34. And I think this is the perfect scripture to put front and center. And for the fall season and Thanksgiving, I think it's going to be perfect. But you could leave this up all year round. So I'm just taking off the top part of my vinyl and leaving the words on the backing sheet. Then I'm going to go in with my pen that I love so much and remove the insides of the letters. And this is called weeding. And then I'm going to take my transfer tape, which is actually shelf paper from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to put that on top and then pull off the backing sheet to put it onto my surface. I'm using the font called Sunday Morning, and so I will have this listed in the description box below, but I got that off of thehungryjpeg.com. And if you don't have a cutter, I will have this particular scripture in my Etsy shop, and that is White Sparrow Living. So since I'll be using this in my fall decorating, I'm going to be using the pitberry garland to use as my hanger. So I just fed that through the tube of the top part of my sign, and then I'm just going to twist it together and then feed it back through so that you don't see that part. So down at the bottom, I used some Scotch tape and an empty wrapping paper roll, and just to give it some heftiness and weight at the bottom so it didn't roll up, I just used that, and then I'm going to use my hot glue gun to make a big long line of glue, and then rolled that over on top of it and then mushed it down so that it would stay in place. And here it is, and I am so in love with this. This is my favorite, and it was basically the easiest one to do. And I've got it with my little pumpkin guys over to the right and a couple of other DIYs that I did in previous videos that I'll have linked in the description box below. But I just love how this turned out. The craft paper, I had actually ordered some on Amazon, and it was $11 for 2 rolls. And I actually just got it today, but I happened to be at the Dollar Tree because I'm never there. And they had it sitting right out there, and this was the first time I've seen it in a long time. So you can get it for $1, but if they don't have it, you can get it on Amazon, and I'll have it in my Amazon store, which is in the description box below as well. For our next project, we're going to be using some maple leaves, a book, our hot glue gun, scissors, jute twine, and the handle of a used paintbrush. And so the first thing I did was just tore out a bunch of pages from this Dollar Tree book, and then I'm going to make a template from one of the pages and then just cut out a whole bunch. I didn't really know how many I would need, but I just did a bunch, and then if I needed more, I just added to it. So this template, I just kind of did it freehand, but it turns out This isn't the right shape, but you'll see that in a second, and I think it looks cuter. So I don't really have a template for that. I just used this and then I'll adjust it later on. So all I did was started using my hot glue and folded the pages over and just got them together at the open side so that they're all closed and they look like little pieces of rolled over paper. So then I took each one and started gluing those together, and then just attached each of those, and I made little bunches of 5 or 6, and then I'll end up putting those together into one big circle. So this is the point when I realized it's not really looking like a pumpkin, so I needed to round the top edges, and so I just pulled the pieces together and then made a rounded corner and got rid of the square edges, and that made it look way better. And so I ended up doing the same thing on the bottom, and even though I needed it to be flat in order for it to sit flat, I did the same thing towards that bottom corner. And then I'm going to put them all together. So if you were looking at a template that was laying flat on your surface, it would be probably the top parts of a heart, kind of, and then it would be at the top and bottom of your flat page, if that makes sense. So now I'm going to take the handle of my used paintbrush and I'm going to tuck it right in the middle of my pages, and I used some hot glue to secure that, and then I put my pages together where it became a full circle. Now I'm going to take my jute twine and wrap that all the way up my stem, and then I'll just tie that off in a knot back down towards the bottom. And I just thought that would be cute if they were long and left hanging, and that would count as our little tendrils. So now I'm going to take some maple leaves, and I just took some berries and a couple of the leaves, and I'm going to tuck those inside one of the pages, and to secure it, of course, I'm going to use my hot glue. And then I took a small piece of buffalo check ribbon, and I'm going to tie that around under the berries and over the leaves, and then give those a dovetail cut going diagonally. And then he is all done. And here it is, all finished. And I think he is so stinking cutie patootie. I would love to see 3 different ones in different sizes all put together but made the same way and maybe embellished differently. I also think it would have been a really cute idea to take some of that pumpkin chalk paint and just dusted the edges with a little bit of that orange and on the tops and bottoms, but I still think he's cute. I think it turned out adorable, and it was pretty easy once I got the hang of it and figured out what pattern to make it. So I hope you guys like it. For our next project, we're going to be using this scarecrow sign, a kneeling pad, a metal word, we're using thankful, and then 3 of these wooden leaves. And so the first thing we're going to do is take off his little hat brim that says Happy Fall, and I took off all of the excess glue that was on there, and then using my needle nose pliers, I'm going to pull out those staples from the back of the sign. This is going to be a twofer also, so we're going to make something on the front and the back. So I'm first going to use my Waverly white chalk paint. Then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to make some lines on my foam kneeler, and I made them 3/4 of an inch thick, and then I'm going to take these outside and cut them with my miter saw. And so I have an array of different pieces, and so now I'm going to take my utility knife and cut these right down the middle. And I do that a few times so that it's nice and open, because this is going to serve as a frame around our sign. So you want to make sure to push it on there tight and that it fits, and you just need to pull it out a little bit so that it's all snug as a bug in a rug. And then I'm going to mark where I need to cut it off, and then I'm going to make this frame go all the way around my sign. So once I have all my pieces in order, I'm going to take it apart and then use my Waverly chalk paint in white, and I'm going to give it a couple of coats. And then I'm going to go back after I'm done painting my thankful sign, and I'm going to put some Waverly wax in antique so that it will look like wood. And you guys, it totally turns out looking like wood, I think. So now I'm going to take my black chalk paint and give my thankful sign a cover, and I'm going to do that actually twice. And then to seal it, I'm going to use my matte finish Waverly varnish, which I forgot to show you guys. So now I'm going to take a black felt pen and I'm going to make lines going across my board, and I made them 1¼ inches thick. So here's where I'm using my Waverly wax, and I diluted it down with some water, and then I'm just using a makeup sponge to put that on there. And one thing about using my chop saw, it's got that big round blade, and so because I had to make 2 cuts for one long strip, there's some nice saw blade marks in there, which I think makes it look even more like legit wood. Then I'm going to take my hot glue gun, and you really don't even need the hot glue, but I just did it to make it super secure, and then I'm going to put this on all the way back around. So now I'm going to take my wooden leaves, and I just used a little bit of spackle to fill in the holes at the top because these are ornaments, and then I'm going to use my chalk paint in pumpkin and paint the first one just straight out of the jar onto the leaf, and then on my second one I'm going to add a little bit of mineral to it just to lighten it up a tad, and then on the third one I'm going to make it even lighter by adding more of the mineral. And the mineral is kind of a grayish white. It's really close to white, so you could totally use white too, but I just had this and poured some out. So I just painted them from the centers and moved it out towards the ends of the leaves. So to place my metal word onto my sign, I'm going to use some Mod Podge and put it all over the back of the metal. And hot glue is kind of hard to use with these words because they're so thin and you really have to work fast, and it doesn't really stick to metal that well. So I just went with this method and it worked out perfectly. So any of the ickies I went over on top of it, and it just gave it a nice little coat and made it all perfect and beautiful. So then I took my leaves and I hot glued those, and I kind of went crooked on one and then crooked on the other, going the other way and then back the other way. So it's just kind of cute and whimsical. So this can be reversible, and all I did was I took a burlap leaf and just hot glued that to the top of his hat, and then I'm going to take some raffia and just fold it over a few times to make a sweet little bow, and I'm going to cut that off and then hot glue that over to the side. And then I took a sunflower that I had popped off of one of those standing pumpkins, and so I'm recycling that and putting that right in the middle of his little straw bow. And here he is, all finished and dressed up, ready to go. And I love how it's up and down, and I left the frame white on this side, and even with just the white paint I think it still looks like wood. And so I'm really loving all of these colors of fall, and what Dollar Tree has, I think their colors are right on point. And here it is with the little pumpkin, and then we'll turn it the other way and you can set this on a countertop or hang it. And so I think this turned out so stinking cute, and I really think this looks like wood. So we always have a hard time finding things that can frame signs, but I think this looks rustic and weathered, and no one would ever know that it's just foam. So I love this, and I hope you guys like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using one of these long wooden signs, and then 3 of these wooden pumpkins, and you don't have to have 3 different colors, and then a metal word, and we're going to use the one that says harvest. And so the first thing I'm going to do is get these things ready to paint, and so I just pulled off the raffia at the top of the pumpkins, and then I'm going to sand off that glitter, and this is actually going to be the back, but I'm going to paint the entire pumpkin, all 3 of them. And to get the stickers off, I'm going to use my heat gun just so that it pops off, and then there's still some stickies on there, so I just end up sanding those down. On one of them, I'm going to take the little stem out and leave the other 2, and then I'll paint the sides of each of the pumpkins first so that I can hold it from the front and back with my fingers, and then I'll set it down and paint the top, and then once that's dry I'll turn them over and paint the backs. And then I'm going to take my long sign and I'm going to give that a couple of coats as well. So then I took my chalk paint in ink, which is just black, and I'm going to paint over about 3 or 4 rows of my dots because one of our pumpkins is going to be white with black dots. And then the other 2, we're going to put ribbon on them. So for one of them, I'm just going to do horizontal stripes. And so I used my hot glue gun to wrap it around, and I'll go to the back and just give those each about the same distance apart so that it looks like it's actual stripes. And because there's little cutouts at the tops and bottoms, it worked out perfectly where I could just stay on the flat parts of the side. And then for the next one, I'm going to use the satin ribbon, and that first one was the grosgrain ribbon, and I'm going to put that ribbon vertically, and that's why we needed to take out that stem. And then I'll glue that on the back as well, and then I'll take my skinny ribbon and put those right next to it so it looks like a grain sack pattern. And so again, I'm just going to do super tiny lines of hot glue and make those meet up in the back. So now I'm going to take my chalk paint in the color pumpkin, and I'm just going to give my harvest a couple of coats so that it's nice and solid. Then I'm going to take a utility knife and cut a little slit in my ribbon and pop my stem back in there and hammer that in so that it's all nice and secure. So now I'm going to take my orange ribbon, and I just cut a small piece and tied a knot, and then I'm going to cut that down on each side, and I just did a diagonal cut at the ends. And then I'm going to take my paddle wire and just cut off about 12 inches or so, wrap that around underneath the ribbon, and then take a pencil and wrap it around a bunch of times so that it becomes the little tendrils of each of the pumpkins. And then once you pull the pencil out, you can kind of pull the wire so that it makes it a little bit longer, and then you can put it in whatever direction that is cutie patootie. So now to attach my harvest sign to the base, I'm going to put it in place and then make little dots of where I will need to make little holes so that I can run some paddle wire into the wood so that I can then keep my word on the base. So to make my holes, I just took a nail and a hammer and pushed that nail into those little holes. So after I got my holes in place, I took some of that paddle wire and just fed it through the H and the T of harvest, and then wrapped it around on the inside of my base, and then went back in with some more pumpkin chalk paint to cover up the wires a little bit. So now I'm going to attach my pumpkins to the top of the base, and I just measured in to make sure I had the same distance on each side of my first pumpkin, which is going to be in the middle. So I just made 2 small lines in between those pencil marks and then placed my first pumpkin, and then I took my outside ones and kind of eyeballed where those would be because it was easier to see once the middle one was already there. Here it is, all done, and I am totally in love with this. It's so simple and sweet and super easy to do. I love that the black and white just makes the orange pop, and I think it's super festive, and I hope you guys like it too. We're going to use 4 packs of these plastic headbands, 2 galvanized buckets, and some fall stems, and a long bamboo skewer. And so what I did was I took my hot glue gun and just made a bead all the way around the skewer, and then just continued rolling it so it would dry pretty evenly. And then I'm going to take my headbands, and these have circles on the ends, so they worked out perfectly, and I'm going to feed on all 6 of them, which is 2 packs of 3. And then I'm going to make another bead at the bottom portion of my skewer, and then I'm going to feed on the other side of the headbands, going in the opposite order that I did at the top. So the last one will be the first one on the bottom, and then the second to last one will be the second one, and so on and so forth. And then I'm going to spread those out and hot glue over the skewer and let it kind of drip down into those nooks and crannies so that it all stays in place. And I'm going to do the same thing with a different pattern of headband, and this one has a little skinnier opening, so I had to use a smaller skewer for this one. So then I took them outside and I'm going to spray paint them using this Rust-Oleum hammered white spray paint. And the only reason I even used this hammered spray paint is because I was out of my regular Rust-Oleum white spray paint. So I just used what I had and painted these on the inside, the outside, and then I flipped them over and painted them from upside down. And so now I'm going to take my pumpkin chalk paint and go along the edges of both of my pumpkins. Oh yeah, these are pumpkins, by the way. And I'm going to paint them on the insides and outsides, not completely, but just to give it some oranginess so that you know that they're pumpkins. And this would be a really cool DIY if you just wanted to make orbs, because I think they turned out really cute. But I pushed them down a little bit so that you could tell that they were actual pumpkins. So I just poked them into some floral foam so that they would stand up while I was painting them. So now where all that gobbledygoo is, where I had hot glued the skewer to the headbands, I'm going to cover that all up using my jute twine, and I'm just going to feed it in and out and make sure that that's all covered. And that's also going to serve as the stem once I get to the top. And once you get past the headbands, it's easy breezy because you just twirl the skewer and it covers it up, and you can make it as fat or as skinny or as tall as you want. So I made one fat and one skinny just to give them a little bit of difference. So now I'm going to take my Waverly chalk paint in ink, and I took off a few of the rows of rope underneath so that I could paint up there and not get it on my rope. And then I'll glue that back once I get it all painted. So now I'm going to take my Dollar Tree floral foam and I'm going to cut that down to the size that I need it so it doesn't show over the edge of the bucket. And I'm going to hot glue that to the bottom. And then if you happen to have a Dollar Tree plastic bag, this would be the time to use it. And I just tucked that inside and then added some Dollar Tree moss to the top. And then I'm going to poke in my pumpkin, and then I'll cut apart my fall picks and start adding those in to the middle. And I wanted to keep them all towards the center so you could see the outside shape of the pumpkin. So I just tucked those in there. And then once I got everything in place, I decided that I wanted to add some brown to the outside of my pumpkin just so it wasn't such a bright orange. And so I'm just going to use my truffle again to knock that color down, but you could leave it this way, or you could even just paint it completely orange. But I do think the completely orange would be cute too. So then I'm going to take my Silhouette Cameo 3 and I'm going to cut out the words "Give Thanks." And I used the font called Sophie, and that's from thehungryjpeg.com. And I'm going to place those on the outside of my pots, and then it's done. And here they are all finished, and I think these turned out super, super cute, and they're totally unique. And I'll probably use this method again to make orbs, or I don't know, something else, maybe a bird cage or something. But I love the black with the jute rope and combined with the pine cones and the cotton and those cattails. I just think it's super adorable. I love it. I hope you guys like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using a styrofoam pumpkin, some buffalo check ribbon, some pitberry garland, some nautical rope, a 9 3/4 inch square sign, a blessing sign from the Easter time signs, and some raffia. And then from Hobby Lobby, some white wood plank paper. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the stem out of my pumpkin, and then I'm going to use my knife to cut that in half right at that seam where the pumpkin mold comes together. And there's actually a flat part there, so if you cut right, you can actually get it to where it's perfectly flat and will go against my surface. So now I'm going to paint my pumpkin, and I'm using my Waverly chalk paint in white, pool, and celery, and I'm just going to get those all mixed up and make it look all pretty and blended. So then I'm going to go back in with my white chalk paint and go through those lines of the pumpkin and highlight that, and then over the tops with a pretty dry brush, and then I'll go back in with the blended greens and blues and just make it all pretty and distressed and whitewashed and soft looking. So now to make the stem for my pumpkin, I'm going to take some nautical rope and unwind it, and I'm going to glue that all around this skewer, leaving about an inch or so down below so that I can stick it into my pumpkin. I saw this method being used by another YouTuber, Justin Ray, but he is just such a sweet soul and his style is impeccable. So definitely check him out and you will not be disappointed. So now I'm going to take my black chalk paint, which is called ink, and I'm going to paint my blessing sign. So now I'm going to take my sign and take out the insides, and you always have to be careful with these little tabby thingies because they're not that sturdy and they could break off, so just be careful when you're pulling them up and putting them down. So now I'm going to take that backing and I'm going to trace it onto my plank paper from Hobby Lobby, and I get these for 25 cents each because it's $1 when you buy 4, otherwise they're 69 cents each, so you just might as well buy 4. So now I'm going to place that back into my frame and close up my little tabbies, and I made sure to put the nails at the top of my sign. So now I'm going to take my stem and pop it into the top of my pumpkin, and then I'm going to hot glue the entire pumpkin on the back and also on the back part of my stem, so the stem will really stay in place because it's attached to the sign, and then I'm going to rest it on the top part of that bottom ledge. And then I'm going to give him a haircut so that he's not out of control at the bottom of his stem, and then I'll glue my blessing sign right on top of that. So now to embellish my pumpkin, I'm just going to take some Dollar Tree lace and some sage green grosgrain ribbon and make a sweet little bow by folding it over in thirds, and then I'll wrap a piece of wire around that and twist it in the back to get that all nice and secure. And then I have these metal leaves that I used in my prior DIY, and so I'm going to take that and kind of curve it so that it lays over the side of the pumpkin. So I'll hot glue that down, and then I'll take the little raffia bow that was already on it and attach that to the middle of my bow. So now I'm going to make a single tendril using the pipberry garland, and I just wrapped it around a pencil and then pulled it off of there, and then I'm going to stick that into that top part of my pumpkin. And then I'm going to take some of these Dollar Tree pine cones and place 2 right at the middle of my bow, and it's all done. And here it is, all finished. This is a really versatile sign because you can make the pumpkin any color that you want. So if you're doing the traditional oranges and fall colors in your home decor, this will be so pretty in those colors, and really any color that you use because it'll pop against that black and white. But I love how this turned out, and I hope you like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using 5 of these chenille covered pumpkins, some small Halloween pumpkin picks, and then from Walmart I have these eucalyptus stems that are $4 each, and then some scrap greenery and leftovers I have from prior projects. And then also from Walmart, this cotton stem, and there's I think about 12 bowls on this, and that's $4 also. So we had recently had our fence replaced, and so I had some scrap wood of the fence pieces, and so I'm taking this 1x4, and it's actually not even 4 inches. It was cut down for a piece that Michael J needed to finish a gate, and you'll see that the box doesn't even match up right and it's warped, but these were scraps and I wanted this to look rustic and old, and it definitely does. So all we did was cut the pieces down, and then Michael J used his brad nailer and put those together, and then we're going to use some white chalk paint to paint that all up. So even though we were using scrap wood for this project, I do have the measurements in case you want to make this the same size. And so we have 2 pieces at 28.5 inches by 3.5 inches tall, and then 2 pieces at 5.25 inches by 3.5 inches tall. And then for the bottom, I have 1 piece at 27 inches by 5.25 inches wide. So you don't have to make them the exact same dimensions, but just in case you do like the size of this one, you'll have some instructions to make it. So this is one of our doggies, Lola, and she likes to sit outside with us while we're working, and she even likes to smile. So I told her to smile for you guys, and so she's smiling for the camera. She's so sweet, and she's our love bug. And then our other love bug, Cadence, is going to help me with this part of the project. And so I just took some Waverly chalk paint in the color Pool, which is that tealy blue, and then some moss. So I just mixed those together and made this really pretty green. And then we're gonna paint the picks, and the glittery ones didn't have a stick with them, so we just stuck in some skewers and broke those off later to fit into our box. And Cadence is such a good painter. The white styrofoam pumpkins actually have a jack-o'-lantern face on it, so I painted over those, and I'm just going to tuck those in so that you can't see the little faces. So then we're going to take some sandpaper, and together Cadence and I did some sanding on our pretty little box and got that all nice and distressed and old looking. So I really loved how my box turned out, and I decided not to glue down my styrofoam to the bottom of the box because I just didn't really want to ruin it by putting the hot glue in there. So we just placed it in there, and then we're going to take some brown moss and some green moss and just put that all over on top of that floral foam, and we just pull it apart and make sure that it's kind of all covered and there's no foam showing. And then on top of the brown we put some of the green and just went about the same business of scattering it all over evenly. And then we're going to take the eucalyptus stems and place those on the sides of the styrofoam and bend them so that they're coming out of the box evenly. And then we took the rest of the greenery and scraps, and Cadence did a really good job. I think she is just totally my girl. And so we just placed those here and there. And then we're going to take our chenille covered pumpkins and place those on skewers and then put them into the styrofoam and kind of tilt them forward and backward, and just so that they were all different angles. And so this way also you're going to have two sides so it can be seen on both the front and the back. Well, there really is no front or back. It's just a two-sided centerpiece. So then we're going to take our little pumpkins and place those here and there in between the bigger pumpkins and just kind of cover up the stems with that greenery. And then I'm going to take my cotton bowls and put those in different places as well, just to give it some more of that white and give it a farmhouse look. So I just pulled them apart so that I could place them individually, and I put a couple here and a couple there. And here it is all finished. I have it on my island, and on my island is my sink. And so there's a spot where instead of having a backsplash, you don't always want to see the sink. And so even though my faucet is superly beautiful, I like to have something in between so that it's not just completely open. So I thought this was the perfect place to put this, and it's nice and long and it's pretty from both sides. I love these soft colors, and this just really makes my eyes happy. For our next project, we're going to be using a few pairs of men's socks in coordinating colors and patterns, a twig from outside, some black wire, some random scrap greenery from Dollar Tree flowers, some embroidery floss, and a large-eyed needle, and then some polyfill or some kind of stuffing. I got this from an old pillow. And so we're going to be making some mini sock pumpkins, and so I'm going to take my socks and cut both of them at the same time just above the heel, and then I'm going to take my embroidery floss and weave that in and out at the top part, and then once it comes around to the other side, I'm going to take that and gather it and pinch it off and then tie it off, and then I'll turn it inside out, and that'll be the bottom of our pumpkin. And so the neat thing about using patterned socks is that when you turn them inside out, it's the opposite of the finished side, so it has a completely different look and it has a lot of texture, and I just thought that was really cute. So then I'm going to take my stuffing and stuff it into my sock, and then I'm going to take some more of the embroidery floss and go in and out and do the exact same thing that I did on the bottom, except this time instead of cutting it off, I'm going to take my needle and stick it in through the top and come out of the bottom. And so it's a little tricky and a little hard, and I end up putting a piece of wood underneath because when you turn it over you can shove it down and your needle will pop out, and every time we go around that's going to be the lines of the pumpkin, so you'll pull it really tight and then just keep going all the way around. And then once you're done, when you go back through the bottom a final time, you're just going to knot that off and make sure that it's all nice and secure. And then I'm going to take my twig and decide how tall I want that, and then I'll put some hot glue in the middle and then add my stick to it. And then I'm going to take my black wire and wrap it around something. You can use a pencil, or I was using this twig, and then I'm making the tendrils. So now I'm going to take my leaves, and I like these because there were 3, and I ended up taking them and cutting them apart after a while. And my leaves were a little too green, so I decided to take some chalk paint in Nimbus, which is a really light gray that I thought would go good with this color palette. But it also made it look a lot like lamb's ear and gave it that real soft touch with the green showing through. So now I'm going to take this Dollar Tree basket, and I'm just going to take it outside and give it 1 coat of that spray paint. And so here it is, all done. I put all of the little guys inside of the basket and one on a little pedestal. I think it's so sweet, and anytime anything's real small and fun size, I think it's just adorable, and I hope you guys like it. For our next project, I have 3 cans. I have some chili beans, some diced tomatoes, and my lunch chicken noodle soup. I didn't want to waste it, so I added some onions and olives and made some chili beans for the kids who were spending the night. So then I'm going to wash out and take the labels off of my cans, and then I'm going to use some green, white, and black grosgrain ribbon, some buffalo check ribbon, 3 bendable sponge rollers, or you could use twigs for your stem, some green and white pip berries, some raffia, and then I'm running low on my orange pumpkin chalk paint, so I'm going to have to mix my own by using crimson and maize. And so I did this the exact opposite way that you're supposed to. I had a viewer tell me that you're supposed to do the light color first and then add the dark to it. So I ended up having to make a little more than I needed to, but I'll put this away and use this probably for the rest of fall. So now I'm just going to use a paintbrush and paint my cans, and I'm going to paint the bottoms because those are going to be our tops of our pumpkins. And so I actually liked the way it looked after only 1 coat, because then some of the tin can was still showing through, but you can do it either way you want. And then I'm going to take some chalk paint in truffle, and I'm going to paint my green stems. And then I'm going to take my scissors and cut the foam part of the rollers, and then I'll take my wire cutters and cut the inside part that is what makes them flexible and bendable. And I'm going to make 1 small one, 1 medium one, and 1 large one for each of my cans. So now I'm going to take some Waverly wax in white, and I've never used this before, but I found it at Walmart, and that's where I get all of my Waverly paints and waxes and all of those fun supplies when they have them. And I'm just going to brush that on and wipe it off just like I do with my regular antique wax. But I was really liking the way it looked just even without wiping it all the way. If I did get a little heavy-handed, I would wipe it off, but it just gave it a really pretty rustic look, and I like the way they turned out. So now I'm going to take my stems and hot glue those to the tops of my cans. And where I had cut them originally, there was a little green peeking out, so you just want to touch that up, and if anything comes off while you're decorating them, you can always just touch it up at the end. And so then I'm going to take those stems and kind of get them a little crookedy so that they're nice and cute and tilted. So now to decorate the tops, I'm going to start with my buffalo check ribbon, and I'm just going to dovetail both ends and make strips, and I'll see how large I want to make them on each of my cans. So then I'm going to lay those all out, and then I'm going to take my, is it raffia or raffia? I don't know, but I'll call it stringy hay. I'm going to take my stringy hay and just wrap it around a couple of times and make it all nice and messy, and then I'm going to take some jute twine and wrap it around there and tie it in a knot. And then I'm going to add some grosgrain ribbon in all 3 colors, the black, white, and green. And I'm going to dovetail the edges of those and make sweet little piles of cuteness. And then I'm going to take some more jute twine and wrap it around those little bundles. So now I'm going to make the tendrils out of this pipberry garland, and I'm going to tie it into the jute twine, and then I'm going to use a pencil to make those little curlicues that you see me do so often. And then I'm going to fluff out my sweet little bow and get it all cute and messy. and you're done. And here's how they turned out, and I think these are so stinking cutie patootie, and they cost next to nothing because you just are using the cans and you got lunch out of it. And so just with their scrap ribbon you could do this, and they're just so fun. It could go anywhere in your fall decor. So I love these and I hope you like them too. For our next project, we're going to be using a Dollar Tree thankful platter, a family wood sign, and then a Sharpie that I get from Walmart. And all I'm going to do is use my Annie Sloan paintbrush, and I'm going to use my white chalk paint to paint my entire tray. So after my platter is completely dry, I'm going to take my black Sharpie and I'm going to write the scripture Ephesians 3:14 and 15. And it says, "For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name." And so the family part is going to be my sign, which I'm going to paint black in just a second. So I wasn't really sure what kind of font I wanted to use, so I decided to just have fun with it, and I did some letters in capital and some in the lowercase, just to give it a little bit of cuteness and whimsy. One thing I did do wrong is I thought I had it perfectly figured out how it was going to be centered at the top of my platter, but I started a little bit too far to the left. So if you do this project, start a little bit to the right. I mean, I guess it depends on the size of your writing too. So anyway, maybe you should just do it in pencil first. So then I put my family sign in the place where it's eventually going to go, so I would know where to write the rest of my scripture at the bottom. And then I'll write Ephesians 3:14 and 15 at the bottom curve of the platter. So this is such an awesome scripture because the Greek word for family is patria. I don't know how to say it right, but it's derived from the Greek word for father, which is pater. Again, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the point being, it's saying that Paul, who wrote this scripture, kneels before the Father, obviously God, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. Well, family is taken from that Greek word, patria, which is the Greek word for father. So in every family, God is the derivative. And that just gives me chills. I just think that's so cool. So now I'm going to take the jute twine off of the back of the family sign, and I'm going to take all the little bits out of there so that it will lay flat on my tray once I glue it down. And then I'm going to take some sandpaper first, sand that down and get all the ickies off. And then I'm going to take my chalk paint in black, and I do the edges first because there's a lot of them and a lot of insides, and so this way I can hold it while I'm doing that inside work. And then I'm going to take it and paint the face of it completely black. So now I'm going to take my hot glue and glue that down really quickly so that it doesn't dry at the first part where you do it by the time you get to the end, and then place it on your tray. So now I'm going to take some of the boxwood greenery from Walmart, and these are 97 cents. Did I already tell you guys that? Anyway, I'm going to put a couple of sprigs on each side and hot glue those down, and then I'm going to take one of these allium pieces and put that right in the middle, and that's all there is to it. And here it is all finished, and this is definitely my favorite for today. I love the black and white, and then just hitting it with that one pop of color always just makes my heart so happy. And of course, anytime I'm seeing the Word of God placed somewhere in my house, I like it everywhere, but that always makes things even better. But anyway, I love how it turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. For our next DIY, we're going to be using this pumpkin wreath form. And I got this at Hobby Lobby. It's like chicken wire ribbon, and it was on sale for $2.50. A super pretty assortment of Dollar Tree flowers, and then some nautical rope, some Dollar Tree ribbon, and I don't end up using the green, but I use the other three. And so the first thing I did was took my wreath form, and I'm using the chicken wire to go up and down each of the wire bars that go vertically. And the chicken wire ribbon is really pretty thin, so you can just use your scissors to cut it, or if you want to keep those protected, you could use your wire cutters, but it is pretty thin. And then when I wrap it around the end, I'm gonna take the raw edges and carefully wrap them around that bottom cross wire and do the same thing at the very top. So now I'm gonna take that nautical rope and go all the way around, because where I wrapped that chicken wire, it's a little prickly pear on the back. So to cover that up and get rid of the pointy edges, I'm gonna use that rope to make it a little buffer and softer on the back side so it doesn't scratch your door or hurt your fingers. So now I'm going to make a nice big bow, and I'm using the little red truck ribbon on the bottom. So I'm going to make it pretty big, bigger than the other two, and so I'm doing 3 loops on each side using the fold over method, and then I'll fold it in half so that I can get the center, and that's where I'll put my chenille stem. But I'm going to make little slits on the sides, just teeny tiny little slits, so that I can move the loops around once I get my chenille stem on there. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing with the buffalo check ribbon, but I'm going to put one on top of the other just so that they'll be kind of intertwined once I poof out all the loops on that. I want to keep this kind of rounded at the bottom so that you can still tell that it's a pumpkin. And so if this was just a wreath, I'd probably make them different sizes and kind of go less of being in a circle and more kind of oblong and hangy and foofy all over. You know what I mean by foofy, right? So I'm just going to feed the chenille stem in through that chicken wire and anywhere where I can grab onto it, and then just twist it in the back so that it stays in place. Now I'm going to take some paddle wire and attach my floral foam to the back part of that bow. This is where I'm going to stick my flowers into. So when you're putting your flowers in, I just made sure that I was holding it tight so that it didn't flop around and wouldn't come undone. So I ended up using 1 stem of dahlias, 1 stem of Gerbers, and 1 stem of Status on each side, which I don't even know what Status is, but I've never heard it called that. But that's like the baby's breath stuff. And then, so I did that on both sides, so that's 6 stems total. And then in the middle, so that I could hide that floral foam, I'm going to stick 1 stem of hydrangeas, and that'll be on the back and on the front, and it covers it up so you can't see it. Because I kept moving my wreath back and forth and being a little rough with it, the rope kind of detached from the metal frame just because it was on with hot glue. So I took some jute twine, and in a couple of places I tied a little knot around the wreath form and the rope so that it would stay on better. Then at the top, I'm going to take a couple of the burlap leaves, and I took 1 orange one and 1 brown one, and they have little wires already attached to them. So I just took 2 of them and kind of made them crisscross at the top, and then attached them to the top of the pumpkin. And then I'm going to take my metal word and attach that using some more paddle wire, and you can kind of feed the ends in through that chicken wire too, so it will stay in place. I decided later that it didn't quite show as much as I wanted to. It's still super cute, but I went ahead and painted it with my ink chalk paint, and so I made that black and it stands out a lot better. So then I'm going to take a super small sweet bow and just fold it over in thirds, and then in the middle I'll just use some wire to pull it together, and then I'll attach that just under the stem of the pumpkin. I wanted something flat so that you could still see the stem and you would know that it is in fact a pumpkin. And here's how it turned out, and I think it's just so sweet and so fall looking. I love that chicken wire ribbon and the burlap and buffalo check, and it's just all things farmhouse, I think. I love how this turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. For our next DIY, we're going to use 3 of these long canvases. I was going to use 2, but we're only using 1 of the wooden trucks. a whole bunch of flowers and stems from the Dollar Tree, of course, and then these funny little feathers that turn out to be super cutie patootie. So I had originally planned to remove the canvas off of these frames and just use the wood part for the box that I'm going to be making. But I had a viewer tell me that if you paint over the canvas, it will have a crackling effect. And so I wanted to try that out. So I painted all of the canvases, and on one of them, I'm going to paint the bottom side because that'll be the bottom of our box once I stack them up. But just like she said, almost immediately it started cracking, and it was so pretty. And the turquoise of the canvases was showing through the cracks, which was really pretty too, but it wasn't the color that I wanted. I had kind of even thought about changing my whole plan to make it go with that aqua color. But it is one of the reasons why I decided not to do both trucks on both sides, because it is so pretty. So now I'm just going to stack my boxes, and I'm going to stagger my lines of E6000 and my hot glue. And the hot glue will make it stick right away, whereas the E6000 will keep it held in position permanently. So now it's time to paint my little red truck, and I didn't want it quite as bright as the red that I had, and it kind of looks like ketchup, so I added a little mustard to it to make it a little oranger. And so then I'm going to take some Waverly wax in antique and kind of make that truck look not so new. And so I just painted all around and in between the little guardrails, and then I'm going to muddy them up by getting some of that wax on there and then just rubbing it in. And I painted his side rails with the antique wax also, and then I just pulled that off, and it looks like little wooden rails. It was really pretty. And then for the wheels, or the tires I should say, I'm going to paint those using my black paint pen. And then for the hubcaps, I'm going to use some Waverly chalk paint in Nimbus, which is a super light gray chalk paint. So then to paint my pumpkins, I decided to add a little bit of green just to give it some color variation, but it wasn't a good look, and I'll end up changing this towards the end, but I wanted just to make sure that they were a different shade than the truck itself. So what I ended up doing was whitewashing them kind of with the white chalk paint, and that just made them look a lot lighter and more pretty. And then since my truck was all nicely beat up and used, I made sure that I put some more of that wax on the hubcaps so that it didn't look like they were brand new. So look how pretty this crackling is. And I think it had to do with putting on a nice thick coat, and it made it crack a little bit more. So I wanted to try it out first to see about putting the wax on top to make those cracks show even more. So I decided to do it first by testing it where my truck was going to go. In case I didn't like it, I could just cover it up. So I just added a little bit of water to my wax and then went for it and did the entire box. And I think it looks so much like real wood and just really showcases those cracks, which is why I decided not to use that second truck. And I'm going to make something on the other side. I'm going to use a metal word and place that on the other side so that you can see more of that crackling effect. So since my box is wood, I decided to go ahead and nail the word onto the side of the box using teeny tiny nails. And so I first made a little hole using that nail and put it on top of a scrap piece of wood and hammered it in so that I could put it onto the box a little easier. So now I'm going to take my E6000 and my hot glue and attach my truck to the other side. So this will be reversible, and it's perfect for an actual dining room table or kitchen table because it can be seen on both sides and you have cuteness on both sides. So then I took my floral foam and I'm just going to pop them right inside of the box, and they're pretty snug so I didn't even have to glue them. But then I'm just going to start popping in all of these flowers and prettiness into that floral foam, and I ended up using a total of 12 stems, and so it does take quite a bit to fill something even this small. But it was just a big bunch of beautiful stuff and some picks. I had some mini pomegranates, and the bouquet is what Dollar Tree calls them, with the little cotton bowl. And right smack in the middle, I put those pretty feathers to give it some height, and then it was done. And here it is all done, and I think this is just really fun and festive and just screams fall. And anything with a little red truck has my heart because I think they're so cute. And it's reversible, so if you don't like the truck, you can just put it on the other side and it says thankful, and that we are. And so I like how it turned out. I'm not the greatest when it comes to arranging flowers and florals, but I think this is pretty cute. So in the meantime, Michael J was making some lunch, and he is making a mess too, but it was really smelling good. And this is oxtail stew. Not my favorite, although I didn't actually taste it. And I'm not a scaredy pants. I eat pickled tongue and sushi, so it's not about what it is, but I just don't like any kind of gamey types of meat. But anyway, my mom loved it and he loves it. So I will have this recipe linked in the description box below. It did smell amazing though. I still might try it. So on with our next project. I'm just gonna take a big piece of scrap wood. I'm just gonna sand it down. I'm gonna paint it black using a regular paint roller. And then I'm gonna go back in with some white and nimbus stripes to kind of create a little bit of a plaid pattern. You can see there's still some nooks and crannies on there, and it's not perfectly smooth, but I did want it to still look semi like a piece of wood. So what I did was I measured out, and I'm going to be making different widths of my stripes going horizontally. So I measured 2 inches, then 5 inches, and then 3 inches, and then 1 inch. And then using a T-square, I just made the lines across my board, and then I'm going to go back in with my painter's tape and mask those so I can paint them in. And the board itself is 56 inches by 16 3/4 inches, and I think it's the perfect size for our entryway. So anyway, I went in with my nimbus, and I'm going to do the larger stripes in that, which is a really light gray, and then the smaller ones I did in white. And then I'm going to do some vertical lines in the white and nimbus also. Really, the most challenging part of this project was just figuring out where to put my stripes and how to space them. But once you got that figured out, then it's a breeze. So it did take a couple of coats for each of the stripes, and then I'm just going to remove my painter's tape. And there's something about pulling that tape off that I absolutely love. But what's even more fun is when you pull off stencil tape. But I'll show you that in a second. So for the vertical stripes, I kind of just eyeballed that and went down a couple of inches, and I used my 2-inch tape and my 1-inch tape. And then that gave me different sizes. And I'm only going to do this on the left side of my board. So now I'm going to use my Frisco Craft stencil tape. And because I'm going to be doing such a long sign, I'm not going to be using a mat. So I just adjust my rollers and I place my stencil tape directly into the machine to cut out my stencil. So when you're weeding out a stencil, you're obviously going to pull out the letters themselves instead of pulling up the outside parts of the vinyl like you do on your decals. So now I'm going to take some transfer tape that I get from Frisco Craft, and they have 3 different strengths of tackiness on their transfer tape. So I'm using the medium tack. So I'm going to take another piece of transfer tape for my top part of my stencil, which is going to say "so very," and then the bottom part is going to say "thankful," going vertically. So then I'm going to take my pumpkin chalk paint and I'm going to use a little dauber to get that paint on there. And because it is so tightly adhered to the board, you could actually just paint it right on there and not even have to use the dauber, because my forearm is a little sore now. Anyway, I love taking up transfer tape, and I love the way this leaves such a perfect crisp line. And if this was a smooth surface, there would be absolutely zero bleeding after you paint it. And here it is all done, and I think this is my favorite. I love how this turned out. Again, I love black and white with that pop of color with this orange, and I really love this orange, especially for fall and Halloween. And against my newly painted white house, I think it looks so pretty. This is not how it's going to be set up when we do the entryway decor, but I just set it up here for you guys to see it in this reveal. But I love how this turned out. It's not perfect, but I bet it looks really good from the street. So for this project, I'm using 2 of the Christmas ornament plaques from Dollar Tree, 2.5 rolls of nautical rope, and then some canvas drop cloth that I get from Walmart for $9.99. So all I'm going to do is take some scraps and cover the bottom portion of my ornament on the back. You may want to paint the backs of these just so that it looks a little bit prettier, but the fabric, when we glue it down, that doesn't look that great either. So you could actually even put some more fabric on the back just to give it a cleaner finish. So I just cut around the ornament, and then I'm going to use my hot glue and push that fabric over the edge and kind of do it tightly and pull it in so that you don't have too many wrinkles. And then once I get that all nice and tight and ready to go, this is where you could add that extra piece of fabric to make it cleaner. But I'm going to use my hot glue again to start on the back with my nautical rope, and then I'm going to start twisting it around the front and then over to the back. I'm going to really use a lot of hot glue on the back so that it stays in place, because it's really kind of thick, and there is actually another type of nautical rope that's even thicker, and I tried using that one, but it was just way too hard to go around the corners. And then eventually, the higher you go, it's going to want to slip because you're making that curve. And so I started hot gluing it to the front as well as the back, so it was really going to stay in place. And then on the corner pieces, as you're making that turn, I did hot glue in between there so that it's attached rope to rope and not just to the back of the plaque, if that makes sense. So once I get these completely done, in order to embellish the top, we're going to be using some fall leaves and some buffalo check ribbon and a little bit of the pipberry garland. So using my wire cutters, I'm just going to cut off a bunch of the stems of the fall leaves, and I'm going to decide where I want to place them, and then I'll use my hot glue to get those put in place. I didn't attach my 2 acorns yet, and I'll do that a little bit later once I know everything's in the right place and it's the right level and so forth. So once I get all of my leaves in place, I'm going to be making a big perky bow for the top of these. So I'm going to start by going up about 3 inches from the bottom and doing a twist all the way around. And then I'm going to take another piece and go down and hold those in between my thumb and my forefinger. So every time I go behind that area, I'm going to twist it so it'll be facing the opposite direction. And then each time I make a loop, I'm going to get a little bit bigger until I have 4 loops that are all gradually getting larger and larger. And then I'm going to twist it in the back again, and then I'm going to cut that off. And then I'm going to take the very top loop and I'm going to turn it over underneath itself so that it's still twisted but underneath. And then my chenille stem will go right in between that middle loop, and then you'll twist it in the back and then foof out your poofs. These are very technical terms here. So if you want a completely round bow, like for the top of a gift or something, you'll make those loops the exact same size. But this was the very first way I ever learned to make bows, and it's a little bit more technical or a little bit harder, but I think they're just super, super cutie patootie. And I thought this would be a really good time to show you guys how to make these bows step by step so that we can be ready for Christmas and all the wrapping that you'll be doing, and you know that we will have DIYs with some bows. So then I just attached my bow to the top opening of my ornaments and used my chenille stem and then wrapped that around there. And then I took some pip berries and I just cut off a little bit, and I actually painted these white for a different DIY, and this was the leftover, but I just wanted some white in there, so I'm just going to tuck those throughout, and then I'll take some of that extra nautical rope and then feed that through the tops and tie a knot and then glue those babies together. And here it is all done, and I absolutely love this. I think it's so sweet and it's perfect for the fall season. I love the muted colors with that pop of color at the top and our buffalo check bow, of course. And I love using this drop cloth because it's a really pretty color, but it also looks like linen to me. So I love this, and I hope you like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using this square wire wreath form. And then this Friends Gather Here sweet little sign. Both of those are from Dollar Tree. And then I got this burlap ribbon from Walmart for $4.88. It's 5.5 inches by 30 feet. And then I'll also be using some of these little mini pumpkins from the Dollar Tree. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a chenille stem and I'm going to wrap that around the inside bar of my wreath. And then I'm going to take the end of my burlap and attach that to that chenille stem and just twist that around so that that stays in place. Then I'm going to take that burlap and I'm going to shove some through the first and second bar and then some through the second and third bar. And then I'm going to pull it and gather it together and then do that again, holding them in place until it gets tight enough when they're gathered in place. It's kind of hard to explain, so maybe just watching it you'll understand. So then once you get to the end, you're going to attach your burlap using that same chenille stem and just twist it around, cut it off, and then cut your burlap off, and then you even have some left over for another project. So now I'm going to take some green ribbon from Dollar Tree as well as some oyster color burlap ribbon from burlapfabric.com, and I'll have that listed in the description box below. And I wanted to have the loops different sizes instead of just completely round. And then I also attached them separately with 2 different chenille stems. So now to attach my wood sign, I'm going to use a big fat nail and a hammer, and I put down a piece of scrap wood on my table so I wouldn't make a hole into my table. And I'm just going to hammer those holes in because I'm going to attach this using some paddle wire, and I'm just going to feed the wire through those holes, and then I'm going to attach it to the back part of my wire wreath. And before I tighten the small wire to the wreath, I'm going to make sure that it's centered or positioned in the place that I want it. I wanted the little pumpkin at the bottom to show a little bit more, so I made it a little bit higher than exactly centered. So then I was noticing I didn't really love the glitter on this sign, so I just took some sandpaper and decided to distress it, and it turns out so stinking cute. And so I just went about my business and finished attaching it to the back of my wreath form. So now I'm going to take a wheat stem and I'm going to separate it in 2 halves using my wire cutters, and I'm going to attach those using a chenille stem so that they're in a little bunch, and then I can attach it to my wreath form as well on either side of my bow. Some of this wheat had some orangey colored leaves, and I really didn't want that because I wanted to stay with the color palette that was already on the sign. So these were perfect because they had just the yellowy color and that green. So then I took some of my mini pumpkins and I'm going to attach a few here and there, and I just coupled one larger one with a smaller one, and then I'm going to take some of the green and yellowy leaves from my fall leaf stem and put those right behind a couple of those pumpkins. And here it is all finished, and I love how this turned out. I'm really loving this green against the monochromatic background. I don't think there's really a color that I don't like as long as it's nice and soft, but I feel like it's really traditional even though there's no orange in there. But then because it's a square wreath, it gives it a modern feel as well. So I don't know, I just love it, and I hope you guys like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using a tall scarecrow sign, some raffia, some white string, some chalk paint in ink, and a white paint pen. And all I did was take off the happy fall sign from what's going to be the back side, and then I'm going to use my Waverly chalk paint in ink to paint the front side. Well, this is the front side now of my sign, including the sides. If you were going to use this or do this yourself, I'm a firm believer in painting the back sides, but because I do so many crafts, I have to ration my supplies, so that's the only reason I didn't paint the back. So now I'm going to use my heat gun to speed up the drying process, and then I'm going to go in with some sandpaper and sand down those edges so it gives it a nice rustic finish. And then I'm going to take my white string and then wrap it long ways on my sign and tie a knot in the back. And I want one side to be more toward the left and then the bottom side to be more toward the right. So it should be crookedy and so kind of leaning. And then I'm going to start wrapping my string, and I'm going to go on the right side of the top and the left side of the bottom, if that makes sense. So it's getting wider at the top and the bottom, and it's overlapping in the middle. And then when you finish up, you'll tie it again on the back in a knot. Now we're going to do it the other way, and I'm going to do the same exact thing, but I'm just making a cross that's kind of leaning towards the side. So I'll do the same thing with the crossbar and get that wrapped around as well. So now I'm going to take my white paint pen and I'm just going to write Matthew 13:31 through 39, and I'm going to do it in just freehand cursive writing, and I'm just going to keep going in and out wherever the cross is. I'll just skip right there and go around it. If I don't have a word that will fit all the way, I'm just going to stop it and then move on to the next line. And I'm going to do this all the way down, and as you have the Word of God going through the sign of the cross. And anytime I'm looking for a scripture that has to do with a certain season, I just Google it. And so, for example, I just put in scriptures about the harvest. And so this was one that came up, and it says, "He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world." Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels." And it was so perfect because it all completely fit exactly on my sign. And then I just added a little wooden pumpkin, and I think this turned out so precious and beautiful, and it was so simple. And I think the handwriting just being plain and not fancy or anything is what makes it so pretty. So I love how this turned out, and I hope you like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using 3 more of those scarecrow signs, 3 styrofoam pumpkins, some ribbon, a gather sign, a vine wreath, 2 packs of the rulers, and some eucalyptus leaves. And I get those from Walmart for 97 cents a bunch. And so I'm going to do the same thing with my boards, and I'm going to get those all ready to paint, and I have my little helper Cadence with me. And so the things I'm going to paint are the boards and my sticks, but I first have to cut them down to make everything fit together. So I'm going to take the little measuring parts off of the wooden rulers, and I'm also going to be painting my pumpkins, so I'll get those ready and set those aside. So I want this to look like a little fence, and so I'm going to dog ear the corners of my boards. And then using my rulers, I'm going to make a crossbar at the top and at the bottom. And so because they don't go all the way across, I have to measure and cut off those holes, and I want them to overlap just a little bit. So I went outside and used my miter saw, and Cadence is the one doing the filming here, and so it's a little lower than usual. But you could do this with a utility knife and then just snap off the wood. But my miter saw is so much easier and quicker. It's just easier for me to do it this way. So now I'm going to take my white chalk paint and paint the sides and on the fronts of my fence. And once I get them all painted, I'm going to go in with some sandpaper and do some distressing all the way around and on top. I do end up taking it outside and using my rotary sander just because it was a little bit easier and, again, quicker for me. And I'm going to do the same thing with my ruler pieces. So now I'm going to paint my pumpkins, and I pull off the stems of all of them, and one I'm going to do in greens, one will be in whites, and then one will be in oranges. And if they're not already, just to make it easier to paint them, I'm going to put them on a skewer, and then I'm going to get a little twig from outside and use those as the stems for my pumpkins. So now I'm going to take my gather sign outside, and I'm going to be using some black matte Krylon spray paint, and I just spray painted it black, and I did it from both sides because there's lots of nooks and crannies in there and you want to be sure to get it covered. So now I'm going to put my fence together, and I'm using my rulers to separate them so they'll be nice and even, and then I'll use some E6000 and hot glue to place my crossbars, one at the bottom and one at the top. So now I'm going to take my grapevine wreath, and I just took the jute twine off of it. I did leave some of it on so that it still stays together, but this way I'm able to maneuver my stems in and out without having to go through those jute twine pieces. So now I'm going to take my stems, and these are the Walmart eucalyptus. So I just cut those apart with my wire cutters, and then I'm just going to start sticking them into that grapevine wreath, and then I'll go all the way around. And I like the look of when it's kind of sticking out, but I need this to kind of be all compact. So I'm going to go in with my floral wire, and I'm going to wrap it all the way around the entire thing, and wherever the wire's showing, I'm just going to cover that up with those leaves so that you can't see it. So originally I had planned to use the buffalo check for the ribbon on my wreath to hang it from, but I really wanted to use this ticking fabric that I've had forever, so I decided to use this instead, and I'm just going to cut a strip off of the fabric and fold the sides in, and then I'm going to use my iron to get those down, and then I'll go back in with some fabric tack and make them all nice and secure. And then I'm going to wrap it around the wreath and then attach it to the board with my hot glue, and then wrap it around to the back. And then I'm going to put my gather sign at the bottom, and then using my E6000 and hot glue, I'll get that secured as well. So now to put my pumpkins on, I'm going to take a knife and just cut off the little backs of the pumpkins, and so they'll have a flat back. And then I'm going to be gluing those directly to the board, and it'll look like it's on the wreath, but I'll just kind of stagger them and put one on top of the two. So since I had a little bit of fabric left over, I decided to make a sweet little bow and put that at the top on the holder. And so I just made a single loop on each side, and then took a chenille stem and wrapped it around and twisted it in the back. And then I'm going to take that leftover, it was just enough, I'm going to fold it in half long ways and make the middle part of that bow, and then I'll hot glue that together so that it's all nice and clean. And then I'll hot glue that to my ribbon hanger. And here it is all finished, and I love how this turned out. I really like interchangeable items that I can change for the seasons. So during Christmas, I could put like 3 little Christmas trees where the pumpkins are here, and it's still super cute and goes with the theme of whatever the season is. So anyway, I love how this turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using a harvest pumpkin from Walmart, and I had mentioned that they were $4.88 in my last video, but I was wrong, and I had a viewer who noticed the tag, and it's actually $5.98, but they were in a bin that said $4.88, and my eyes just aren't what they used to be. So we're going to be using that, as well as some raffia, some fall colored light flowers, some lamb's ear, a floral foam ring, some pip berries, paint, some mini pumpkins, some floral picks with pine cones on them, and then some of these items I didn't even use. So the first thing I did was pulled out the stem carefully so that I can replace it later, but I'm going to paint it first, and I started with a white base because I don't want any of the yellow showing from the pumpkin. So I'm painting on top of a foam core poster board. And so when I go to paint my little pumpkins, I'm going to pull out their little stems, and then they come on a piece of wire. So I'm just going to poke that into my poster board and stand those up while they dry. And then I'm going to take a big fat nail and put it inside of my pumpkin so that I can hold it and paint it without touching my paint and getting it all messy. So I just took some chalk paint in moss, white, and pool, and I'm just going to mix those all up and get some nice color variations and make sure that it's all blended and pretty. And then I'm going to go back in later and add some white highlights. So once I was done painting my pumpkin, I took some of the leftover paint and painted my floral ring. And then I'm going to leave my little mini pumpkins completely white and replace their stems And then I'm going to take a chippy brush and just using a dry brush technique, I'm going to go across my entire pumpkin, and then I'll go back in using my same paintbrush, but I'm going to turn it sideways so that I can get in between the little cracks of the pumpkin. So once all of my paint was dry, I took some hot glue and replaced the stem into the pumpkin, and then I'm going to take my lamb's ear and cut it down to the size that will make it fit going across the ring and covering that hole. We're going to be setting the pumpkin on top of this ring, so this is going to actually keep it in place. So now I'm going to take some more raffia and I'm going to fold it over a few times and get it all nice and messy, and then I'm going to take a chenille stem and put it in the middle, and just like we did with the bows from our other DIY projects, I'm just going to twist that around and make it really tight because I'm going to stick that into the styrofoam every now and then. So now I'm going to take these pretty mums and cut those down and place those around my ring as well. And I really love the color of these because they have more of a brownish tone instead of a yellowy tone. And sometimes it's hard to tell when you're actually at the Dollar Tree if a white flower is white or if it's got a lot of yellow in it. So anyway, now I'm going to take my stems that have the pine cones on them and just pull those pine cones off and place those around as well. And then I'll do the same thing with the mini pumpkins, and I'll add some cotton bolls. So I had planned to just leave this the way it was, but it was getting so beautiful, I decided to make it even more of a statement by going out in the garage and found in my junk pile this vase that had an old topiary in it. So I just pulled that out and then used my white chalk paint to paint it. I was going to leave the little brown bits showing, but when I was painting it white, it was just a little bit too dark. And then I thought I would go in with some gray paint or Nimbus and distress it, but I just loved it so much the way it was once it was pure white, so I couldn't stop. So then I found these little antlers at Walmart, and they were $1.34 each, and I kept the price tags this time, so that price is right. And I'm going to add those into the side of my centerpiece. And then I'm going to take my pit berries, and I found some at Dollar Tree that are in the whites and greens, and I thought they were so pretty, so I'm just going to let those kind of guide themselves and leave some loops and bends and let it just naturally flow through there, and tuck it into the flowers and between the raffia and just kind of make it a free form piece. And here it is all finished, and this is in my top 10 favorite DIYs. I love these colors. It's so soft and beautiful, and I think it's just absolutely stunning and high-end looking. I have it sitting right under my pendant light, which makes it a little bit too bright so you can't see the variation in the colors. So I'll show it to you in another place, but this is where its home is going to be because I want it front and center where you can see it from all sides. This seems like it had a lot of steps to it, but it really didn't. And if you don't have a vase like this, you can set this on a cake plate or a pedestal just so that it's elevated a little bit and you can see all that beautiness that's surrounding that gorgeous pumpkin. For our next project, we're going to be using a plastic toolbox, some fall colored leaf stems, and some floral foam, a package of the metal words, and we're using Thankful. And so the first thing I did was just painted my toolbox, and you could spray this, but I decided just to go ahead and use my chalk paint. So I'm just going to get all the nooks and crannies and paint it completely white, including the bottom. I didn't paint the inside because you're not going to see that too much. So then I did paint the front latch and the handle in the Waverly chalk paint in ink. And I'm going to give that 2 coats, and then on my Thankful sign I'm going to paint that in the ink as well, and this will take a couple of coats also just to get a nice coverage and completely solid. So the next thing I'm going to do is mark out where my word's going to go. You could, again, hot glue this onto the front of the toolbox, but I really want this to stay in place. So I'm going to just go ahead and wire this, and I just made 2 little holes using a little, I don't know, poker, and then made those holes and stuck my wire into the box, making sure that it was nice and tight, and then I'm just going to twist it in the back to make it stay in place. So now I'm going to hot glue some floral foam to the bottom of my box, and then I'm going to start adding my fall colored leaf stems into the front, and I'm going to kind of push them in at an angle because we're going to close the lid and they'll just be poking out and overflowing. So now you can totally leave it the way it is, and if you're not a bow person, just feel free to skip this part, but I wanted to get a little bit of buffalo check in there, and there was a hole right at the top next to the little latch, so it was looking like I should put something in it. And so I just made a sweet little bow, and I used a chenille stem to wrap around that and twist in the back, and then dovetailed the edges, and then popped it in that hole, twisted it up, and it was all done. And here's how it turned out, and I think this is so sweet, and you saw how easy this was. If you did leave the bow off, you would be able to see the lid a little bit better, which I think is what is so cute about this. But either way, you don't have to be a flower arranger by any means, because you can just throw those in there. You saw me just stick them into the foam and it was done. And so I love how this turned out, and I hope you like it too. For our next project, I'm going to be using this 6x9 canvas drop cloth that I get from Walmart for $9.97. And then I purchased this gingham transfer iron-on vinyl from Amazon, and I'll have it linked in my Amazon store. So I just cut out a design that I purchased from my Silhouette store, and it's of a pumpkin, and so I'm gonna cut that out by placing my vinyl upside down, and then once it's cut out, then I'm just gonna weed out the outside parts of that material. So then I used some CRICUT brand iron-on transfer vinyl, and I cut out the words pumpkin spice and Jesus Christ. I thought that was super cute. So now I'm going to take my canvas and double it over, and then I'm going to use my everyday pillow to measure how big I want this. I'm going to make this to cover my non-seasonal throw pillows that go on my couch, and then when the season's over, I can just change it out. So I just laid my canvas out and then rolled it over in thirds to make my square 19.5 by 19.5. And I also made sure that there was enough fabric to fold over for a hem for when I put this together. So the sweet people over at CRICUT sent me this Easy Press 2, and I'm just going to set the temperature to 370 and let that preheat. So I'm going to first start by getting it warmed up and flattened out, and I put some fabric underneath so that I had a little cushion under my transfer. So now I'm going to place my pieces, and I cut around my design so that I didn't have any of the transfer tape doubled up. And so then once I get that onto my fabric, I'll take my Easy Press and put it on a portion of the transfer, and then I push the timer so that it tells me how long before I need to move it to the next portion. Once it cooled and it looked like it was on there, then I could remove that transfer tape. So now I'm going to put it together using my sewing machine, and you could use fabric tack or even your hot glue gun if you wanted to, but I just sewed down that one hem that's folded over for the pocket in the back to replace the pillows every time I want to change it out, and then I'm going to fold it back into thirds, making sure that my design is smack in the middle of that middle portion, and then I'm going to sew along both of those sides so that it's all nice and secure. Then I'm going to cut off all my stringies, and then I cut little angles at each of the corners so that when you turn it inside out, it's not all bulky and you can get nice, good, crisp corners. And I didn't do a great job when I was pulling off the transfer tape from the pumpkin. It was just a little stubborn, and I kind of pulled some of it off, but it just makes it rustic and gives it more character, I think. So here it is, all finished, and I think even with my little mistakes, it looks so sweet, and I really love this neutral color palette and my buffalo check. So anyway, I'll do better next time, but I love it, and I hope you guys like it too. So for our next project, we're going to be using an old white sheet, some white string, a white chalk marker, a pumpkin, some raffia, some chalk paint in plaster and in truffle. And so the first thing I did was just cut my sheet down, and I'm going to rip some strips about 2 inches wide, and then I'm going to cut them down to about 4 or 5 inches each. And you get faster because I started folding them over and then just cutting it in one snip, so it was a lot easier to do than doing them individually. And this is a Cal King flat sheet, so it ended up taking about half. So now I'm going to start tying these onto my 12-inch wreath form, and there's 4 crossbars on this. So if you get the larger one, which is 14 inches, I believe, it will only have 3 of those crossbars. So about 17 hours later, after I was all done, I had this beautiful wreath and I was so in love with this. So now I'm going to take my little pumpkin sign and pull it off of the stand and get all the little bits off of this. And I always keep my little parts in case I need that for another project. And then I'm going to take my sticker off of the back, and then this is the side that we're going to paint, but I did take off the burlap from what will be the back just in case any of it shows. It doesn't show, so you really don't even need to do this. So now I'm going to take my chalk paint in plaster and I'm going to paint the sides and the front, which is the back, and then get that all nice and covered. And then I'm going to go back in with my truffle and make the lines of my pumpkin. So to do that, I just kind of start off with some pretty dark lines, and then I'll go back in and shade it in and get it all nicely blended and just meet with that sideways eyeball in the middle of the pumpkin. And you kind of want to go with the bumpity bumps at the bottom of the pumpkin, but this one didn't have it because it was sitting inside of a sign, so you just had to do it on your own. And then on my stem, I painted that with the truffle as well. So once I got my pumpkin all painted and it's all nice and dry, I'm going to take some raffia and just fold it over a few times to get it all nice and messy, but resembling a bow. And then I'll take a piece of jute twine and tie that in the middle, and then I'm going to fluff it out and then attach it to the stem of my pumpkin. And I just wrapped that around so that it would meet in the front, and then I'll tie it off and let those hang, and those will kind of be the little tendrils of the pumpkin. So then I'm going to take my white paint pen and I'm just going to write "Welcome to our patch," and I'm going to use the downstroke method where you make the lines of the downstroke parts of your letters a little bit wider than the rest of the word. And I added a couple of lines on the sides of "to our," and I do have another video that kind of is a semi writing tutorial and gives you a little more detail, but it's pretty much all here. You just go a little bit thicker on those downward strokes. And a lot of you guys say that you like to see me do this writing, and so I do leave it in here, and it's a little bit longer than normal, but I hope that's okay. So originally I was just going to hot glue this right to the wreath, but I loved it so much I wanted to be able to change out the plaque for the seasons so I can use it for Christmas or Easter or winter or whatever. So instead I just put a piece of string with some hot glue and then took some of that sheet and glued that down. For some reason I was thinking about getting my brows waxed right here. But anyway, this way I can just tie it onto the wreath and then change it out for the seasons. So I'll just wrap it around and then tie it in the back, and then it's all done. And here's how it turned out, and I love all the textures and the touchy-feely goodness that you can see with the sheets and being raw on the edges, and I just love everything about this wreath, especially the simplicity of it. It's just clean and cool, and I don't know, it makes my heart happy. So I love how this turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using this Dollar Tree Farm Fresh apple sign. And I really like the sign the way it is, so I wanted to try and salvage the actual paper that's on top of this. So I'm going to use my CRICUT spatula, and you don't have to do this, but this is going to be a gift, so I wanted to make sure that the back was nice and clean, but I also wanted to save the image for a possible future DIY. I've tried doing this before and it's never really worked out, but this time it did, and a little patience paid off and I was able to save the image, and I'm excited about that. So now I'm going to take my Waverly chalk paint in white and I'm just going to cover the entire plaque. Now I'm going to take some spackle and fill in my holes, which I'll change my mind on that later and poke those back out in the end. But in the meantime, I'm going to take my Waverly chalk paint in celery and in nimbus, which is like a light gray color. And then I'm going to start blending my colors and shading it in. I don't want this to look like a pumpkin because the shape is dangerously close to that same shape of a pumpkin. So I want to make sure that I don't have as much of the lines going down that I do when I do my pumpkins. I want this to look like a shiny, smooth apple. So I'm just blending and softening the areas where I'm changing colors and giving it some shading where it should be and some shadows by making it a little bit darker in the green areas. And then to give it a little shininess, I'm going to take my white and make a round curve towards the end, and I think it looks like a shiny green apple. So now I'm going to paint my leaf, and I first started with some celery, and then I'm going to add some nimbus, and I probably should have added some brown to this just to give it a little bit more contrast between the leaf and the apple, but I didn't. And if you do this project, you might want to try adding some, at least around the corners. So now I'm going to take my jute twine and tie a knot at the bottom of my stem, and then I'll wrap it all the way up to the top of the stem. And I used a little bit of hot glue at the top just to keep it all secure, and then I'm going to wrap it back down to meet with that other piece and then tie that in a knot. So now I'm going to go onto my silhouette suite, and I'm going to cut out Proverbs 22:6. And to get my shape, I just used my freehand tool icon and drew the shape of a half of an apple, and then put my measurements in there to make it the same height and halfway across my board. And then I mirrored it to the opposite side, and then it was a full apple. So I was able to kind of get the idea of what shape I was going to be putting this on, and then I designed my decal for inside those lines. And it worked out pretty well. So this was my first time trying it, and you'll see it fits pretty good. Anyway, I'm going to weed out my entire decal and get all of that extra vinyl off, and then I'm going to put my Frisco Craft transfer tape on top of it, and then squeegee it on there, and then pull off the backing paper, and then I'll apply it to my apple and then pull off the transfer tape from there. And this scripture says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." So now for embellishments, we're going to use 3 different Dollar Tree ribbons, some jute twine, and some more pipberry garland. And so I just cut some strips of the ribbon, and I'm going to dovetail the edges, and then I'm going to attach those together using the pipberry garland and wrap it in the back just like I do with most of these little fakey bows, I guess. And then I'll attach that just under the stem, and then I'm going to also add some Dollar Tree pomegranates that I had used in a prior DIY. Well, I didn't use them. I got them ready to be used and then didn't end up using them. And so I'm going to take some more of my jute twine and make a sweet little bow and just wrap it over a few times, and then tie it together with another piece and attach that to the top of my bow. And then just to give it a little more cuteness, I took the ribbons and kind of frayed the edges so that they look all nice and rough. And then I'm also going to add a tiny piece of some lamb's ear from Walmart, and I just took the very top of that stem and added it behind my bow. So I decided I wanted to go ahead and hang this, so I poked out my holes that I had originally filled, and I'm going to place some jute twine in there and then feed on some beads from Amazon, which I'll also have linked in the description box below, as well as in my Amazon store. And so I just did 20 beads and made a loop in the middle so that it can be hung, and then tied off the other side. And then just to give it some more farmhouse cuteness, I took some sandpaper and sanded the edges. And I love doing that when it's on these wood signs because the brown shows through and it makes it look so cutie patootie. And here's my sweet granddaughter Cadence after a long day of schoolwork and getting ready to take her sign to the school for Mrs. Umari. And I think this turned out so stinking cute, and I love everything about it. I love the soft colors, and I'll have this decal available in my Etsy shop. And I forgot to tell you the fonts that I used, which was American Typewriter for the child and Depart. And then for the cursive writing, it's Autumn in November. But I'll have those listed in my description box below. I love this, and I hope you like it too. And I encourage everyone to do something sweet for your teachers to show them how much you care. For our next Dollar Tree DIY, we're going to be using 2 glass bowls and 2 glasses. And so this is so easy, but I love how this turns out. I'm just going to take the stickers off, and I'm going to use my E6000 as well as some hot glue and attach my glasses to the bottom of my bowls. When you're putting it on there, make sure that you're separating the glue from the E6000 because I guess there's some kind of chemical reaction and it doesn't stick quite as well. And then you should let that dry for about 24 hours because these glasses are weighted at the bottom, and so they're super heavy, but that also means that they're going to be super sturdy too. So you could leave these just the plain glass that it is, and I really like that smoky look of the glasses, but I decided to paint these, of course, and I'm going to paint them with my Waverly White chalk paint. And I just gave these 2 coats, and I went all in the horizontal direction because I want this to look like a ceramic or some kind of clay with a little bit of texture. And then I'm going to go in with my brown chalk paint, which is called Truffle, and using a fan brush, I'm going to lightly distress it and give it some more cuteness. So for inside of our candle holders, I'm going to use some Walmart greenery. This is the boxwood. And then from Dollar Tree, I'm going to be using 2 round styrofoam pieces, 2 battery operated candles, and then a pumpkin stem. So now I'm going to take my styrofoam piece and hot glue that to the bottom of my bowl. And then I'm going to take some Dollar Tree moss and tuck that in around the sides and on the top of the styrofoam. It's not really going to show, but just in case it peeks out, I don't want to see any styrofoam. So there's a little tabby inside of your battery operated candles, and I'm not going to glue this down so that you can actually use it, but you do have to pull the little tabby out for it to work. So now I'm going to take my dark green boxwood and I'm going to cut those apart, leaving pretty long stems so that I can let this drape down the side of my bowl. And then I'm going to take my lighter green boxwood and I'll tuck those in sideways going around the opposite side of my bowl. So now I'm going to take my pumpkin pick, and they're actually hanging from the stem on this pick, so I have to cut those off, and then I'm going to use some extra wire from these other stems and poke that into the bottom of the pumpkin so that I can stick them into the styrofoam. And then I'm going to put 2 kind of nestling together, and then I'm going to add some Dollar Tree pine cones here and there around the edges. And then on my candles, just to give it some more cuteness, I'm going to take some jute twine and wrap it around 3 times, tie a sweet little bow, and then pop that on top. And here they are, all finished, and I absolutely love these. I know that we put dishes and bowls on top of candlesticks and glasses and anything we can get our hands on, but I just love the simplicity of these and the beautiful curves of those glasses. I think this might be one of my favorites, but I just love how it turned out and how soft and high-end looking this looks. So I love it, and I hope you guys like it too. For our next project, we're going to be using these large burlap leaves, some grosgrain ribbon in green, black, and white, and then some eyeballs from the Halloween section, some jute twine. And so the first thing I'm going to do is take my eyeballs, and they already have a little hole in them, and so not every one of them has it. So if you just look for the ones that do, it makes it a little bit easier. And you're just going to take a skewer and poke it on there and stick it in some styrofoam so you can stand them up. And I'm going to take my chalk paint in ink and paint all of those little eyeballs. And it only took 1 coat, but I really like these eyeball guys because they're a little bit heavier than the ping pong balls. So it made it easier to work with, and I didn't have to worry about them caving in. So now I'm going to take my white chalk paint and paint my burlap leaves, and I didn't want complete coverage. I wanted some of that brown to show through, but just not so terribly dark. So now I'm going to take my grosgrain ribbon and I'm going to cut those down to about 5 inches, and I'm going to make 12 sets of 3. And then I'm going to take them and fold them in half and take a little bit of jute twine and wrap it around and tie it in a knot, and tie it really tight so that it's a little bit gathered at the top, but leaving enough of a loop that we'll be able to get our jute twine through the top. And then I'm going to dovetail all of the ends and leave some of that jute twine hanging as well. So then I'm going to take my Sharpie again and I'm going to write in kind of long block letters, "In all things give thanks." This is from 1 Thessalonians 5:18, and this is where Paul is giving his final instructions to the Thessalonians. And if you look at the verse 16, 17, and 18, it says in 16 to rejoice always, pray continually, and give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. And so if you notice, the first part says rejoice always. So that doesn't mean just in the good times. And it says pray continually. And that doesn't mean just in the bad times. And then give thanks in all circumstances. Again, not just in the good times. So we have to give thanks in all circumstances and in all things. We can focus on the bad, but I think what Paul's trying to get across here is that we need to look at the good that comes out of the bad. So that's not to minimize what you're going through, and I want to encourage you too, if you are going through a difficult time and need prayer, if you go to my YouTube channel page and there's a tab called Community, I have a weekly prayer post where you can post your prayers and petitions and others will pray for you. And even if you don't have something to post, I hope you'll go to that page and read those prayers that people are in dire need of And when you pray for them, push the thumbs up so that they know that there's prayers ascending. I think it's so helpful for others to see that others are supporting and encouraging and care for them by sending up those prayers to God and letting them know they're not alone. Okay, so back to our garland. I'm going to take a needle and put my jute twine through that, and I'm going to start stringing on my items, starting with the furthest to the right. So I started with my little ribbon tassel, and then I strung on 3 of the black beads, and to make the hole go all the way through, I took that needle and pounded it in with a hammer, and then to make the holes a little bit bigger to get the needle all the way through, I took my big fat nail and just kind of twisted it in there to widen that hole. And then I'm going to string on another tassel, and then in order my words, starting with the last one first, and then I'll end up at the very end with my final tassel. And here it is, all finished, and I absolutely love how this turned out. I fluffed out my little pieces of ribbon to make them all perky and cute, and then placed it across my mantle. And I love these black beads. You know, I like to paint a lot of things white, but I didn't want them to look like ping pong balls. And so these are actually a little smaller than the ping pong balls, so I probably could have gotten away with it, but I love that pop of black, and that green grosgrain ribbon is so soft and pretty, and I just love this color combination. So I love how this turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. For our final project, we're going to be using this big concrete urn, and we got this from my mother-in-law a number of years ago, and it used to be out in the front entryway, but we were having some big large trees trimmed, and I was afraid something was going to fall onto it. So Michael J had moved it to the side of the house to protect it, and it sat there for about a year. So he took it and gave it a really good washing, and I think he may have even used a power sprayer. I'm not sure, but it's super clean. So whatever he did, it really worked. So now we're going to be using some Krylon Fusion all-in-one paint and primer, and I'm using the matte black, not the flat black, but matte, because it gives it a different finish. So I gave this a total of 2 coats plus any other areas that I might have missed, and it ended up taking a whole can of that spray paint, but it was so worth it. So now I'm going to take some Waverly Wax in Antique and a little bit of the pumpkin chalk paint and dilute that down and give it a lot of water. And then I took a teeny tiny paintbrush and started filling in the little nooks and crannies. And then I'm going to go in and wipe it off. I'm telling you, this seriously looks exactly like rust if you look up close. It was a little tedious at first because there are so many nooks and crannies, but once I knew how it was going to turn out, I got a little more courageous and used a larger paintbrush so that I could cover more ground. So I'm going to be making a pumpkin topiary for inside of my urn, and I found this at a yard sale some years ago, and it came with a C, and I really loved it. And these are kind of expensive at the stores and Hobby Lobby, so I'm going to be using that. And then I found these 2 cutie patootie little pumpkins at Walmart, and then of course you've seen the Dollar Tree pumpkin as well, and that'll be at the top. So I first took my hacksaw because the second pumpkin needs to sit obviously on top of this large one that's going to go at the bottom. So I needed to get rid of the stem so that it could sit flush on top of it. And then I'm going to take the stems off of the smaller ones so that each of those can sit on top of each other. And then I'm going to save one of those stems for the top of the Dollar Tree pumpkin, and I'll replace it with one of the better looking ones. And then I'm going to take all of my pumpkins, and using my Waverly chalk paint in white, I'm going to paint them all so that they have a nice solid foundation. And so for the second one, I'm just going to use my same mixture of paints that I used for the rusty color on my urn, and just added some more water and painted it onto my pumpkin and then wiped it off, and it gave it a really pretty brownie orange finish. And then for my larger one, I'm going to use my chalk paint in moss as well as the color pool, and then some white, and get that into a nice soft greeny blue color. And then the third one, I'm going to leave plain white. And then for the top one, I'm going to add some Waverly chalk paint in ink, which is black, and get that to a nice pretty gray color. And then once I get done with my smaller pumpkin, I'm going to put that better stem inside by using some hot glue and placing it inside. So now I'm going to take a big dowel and I'm going to stick it through my pumpkins. And the larger one didn't have a hole, so I had to pound a screwdriver into it to make that hole. so that my dowel rod would go all the way through. So Walmart has this fall garland and I love these colors, and so I got 2 of them. They're a little pricey. They were $10 each, but look at the colors. And so for the places where I have an open spot between number 2 and number 3 of my pumpkins, I'm going to use some of that baby's breath to kind of stick in between so you don't see a gap. So now I'm going to take my heat tool and I'm using this Dollar Tree party bowl, and I'm just going to make a small hole in the bottom and make that go through so that my dowel can go through this when I put it in my planter. So to put it in my planter, I took a piece of square styrofoam and placed that at the very bottom, and then I'm going to put my bowl right on top of that, and it's kind of wedged in there so it doesn't move too much. And then I'm going to place my dowel into the hole and then into the styrofoam, and then I'm going to stack my pumpkins. And then once I get them all in place and turned to the way that they fit the best and they're level, then I'm going to take my garland and wrap it around the base so it covers up that bowl. And you could totally do this with real live plants and flowers, but you guys know how I am with plants and flowers. I can't seem to keep them alive, so this is just going to work best for me. But if you guys have that green thumb, this would be gorgioso with real live plants inside of it. And then for the little gap between numbers 2 and 3, I just stuck that baby's breath in there. And here it is, all finished, and I am absolutely swooning over this. It's kind of funny seeing a fall piece in front of the swimming pool, but it was so beautiful outside and really nice, and this is a huge piece, and because it's concrete, it's super, super heavy. So I absolutely love how this turned out, and I hope you guys love it too. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope it gives you some inspiration. Comment and let me know what you think about these projects. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you like them. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram under White Sparrow Living. I hope everyone has a blessed day, and remember to always be the light. Bye.